Kathy and Ralph Kelly, welcome to 7:30 and thank you for giving us some of your time.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Kathy, I want to start by remembering what all this is about, and that is, of course, your beautiful son, Thomas. Can you tell me a little bit about him?
Oh, well, Thomas was our eldest, as you're aware, and I guess he was feisty, he was insecure, he was funny, and I think sadly, whilst you retain some of those memories, with so much time that's gone by now, they do start to fade, and that makes everything, a little bit bittersweet, but also a bit more sad as well. But yeah, he was a great kid. He wasn't without challenges. Being the eldest, he was always in trouble, but he was a wonderful child, and we're very sad to have spent so much time without him.
Ralph, you always said that your love for him was boundless. How do you think about him when you think about him now?
Well, it's for both the boys, for both Tom and Stu. I know that Kathy thinks about them every day like I do. It's just something that never goes away. I've lost both my parents, as has Kathy, but they live lives. And losing two 18-year-olds, it's a completely different world that it just stays. And the people that we've met who've lost children, it's the same feeling. It doesn't leave you. You just have to learn to, in some way, to just carry on with that trauma and that grief. But the way that I do it is I had 18 years with them, which is great.
And when you think about those 18 years, and I'll come back to Stuart at the end, but with Thomas, when you think about him now, what have your memories of him turned into?
The memories, I know Kathy cherishes the memories as well, but even the bad times are now good times. The things that you got annoyed with, when we'd go to a hotel and he'd jump on the bed and claim the bed over Madeline and Stuart, and those things that used to kind of annoy you and you get upset about now, they've washed, and I look back and I think, oh, we were just silly, we should have just accepted that as kids and what kids do, and enjoyed those memories, not got annoyed at the time. But it's, I think when you're growing up and you've got children, I think everyone experiences those moments and they go, but I look back now and I look at those times and I think, wow, they were great times too, and it was funny, and that he did those things. And one day he got home from school with Stuart, and they were both in their school uniforms, and he said to Stuart, "Last one into the pool's a rotten egg." Anyway, Stuart jumped out of the pool and dived into the swimming pool with all his clothes on. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I wasn't going to be a rotten egg." And there's Tom on the side of the pool just laughing. Those things, they're beautiful memories. Very funny.
Kathy, just one thing I wanted to ask you. You've left Australia to live in the United Kingdom. How hard was it leaving the country where your boys were born and where they lived?
I think any journey like that is very difficult for anybody, and it's certainly had its challenges since we've been here as well. We brought the boys with us. We've still got their ashes, not knowing what to do with them. I think in many ways, the thought process of what we will do with those down the track, it only crossed my mind the other day thinking, gosh, would we spread them here? Will we take them home? What would we do? And of course, our daughter Madeline doesn't want to have a bar of any of that. I think in many respects, so it was much harder leaving her than it was thinking about the boys, because they're just with us. They're with us all the time, and as is she. But I think it was harder leaving her behind than it really was leaving the boys behind, because we just take them with us wherever we go.
Now, the moment arrived for both of you when you had to face the beginning of the process that would eventually lead to the release from prison of Thomas's killer. Ralph, how did you go into that process?
I think you, over years, basically, you realise that criminals have to have parole so that they can be monitored in community, and the closer it got, the harder the realisation became, I would say. Then you have to accept it, and you have to hope that the parole system and the education whilst they're incarcerated and the support that they receive in the community from the system works, because the last thing that we want him to do is to reoffend. And, quite often you can see the offender and you can, Kathy and I rarely ever talk about him anymore, but we do keep up to date on anything we can. And we've now come to the agreement that we need to be positive about it, to not support him, but to support the system, that the system does work. But given the parole hearing and the determination from that, we seriously wonder what the outcome will be from the early release into parole.
We'll come to that in a moment. Kathy, in the past, there were times when you said you wanted him to die in prison. How did you manage those feelings when you were thinking about your own submissions to the parole?
I think, they're very harsh words, and of course, anybody that has experienced the level of grief that we have, it's fair enough that I think I felt like that. And I did say during the parole hearing the other day that I didn't think that I would ever find forgiveness. And I probably still feel like that, and I kind of feel like I will always feel like that. It's a very hard thing to move through, I believe. With the parole hearing coming and knowing that he was going to be released, whether it was sooner or later, I think I allowed Ralph to just do all that research. He had good contacts, people that have supported us throughout the whole court process, and he would just relay that to me. We'd sit down and we'd discuss it. But I think, as Ralph said, we came to that understanding that whilst we didn't want him released and we just kind of hoped that he would stay there forever, that we knew that it was really important for him to not be released into the community without any parole and just free to do what he liked. So I think, you just get to the point where you just have to trust the process and work with it. And I feel like that's what Ralph did, and I supported him in his decision and the submission that we made to the parole authority. However, as Ralph said, it's been a little bit disappointing once the judgment was passed down the other day.
Ralph, I just want to ask you about the parole hearing last year when you found out about his time in prison and how he had behaved. How much information were you given, and what did you learn about his time in prison?
So within the New South Wales government, there's an area called Victims Register, and their remit is to be the liaison between the State Parole Authority and the victim's family. And so once a year you get a phone call from the Victims Register. They're very nice people, and they always start the call the same way. You can ask any questions and we'll provide the answers. It turned out after the first time, which then stayed for the next 12 years, is that if you ask a question, aside from where he is at that particular moment, because they move the prisoners around from jail to jail, so that they don't form friendships, and they wouldn't answer any of my questions. So I had no idea what courses he'd done in jail, whether he was being aggressive or violent in jail. To be honest with you, I learnt more from journalists who would call me and say, "Are you aware of this?" And nobody had informed me from the State Parole Authority or Victims Register. So basically you're in the dark. And I think this is one of the areas, I think it's really important that the victims' families are included in the communication process 100%, because to withhold information and learn it from third parties is really concerning. And I think, we went in, we said to Victims Register, "Please, can you tell us what's been approved?" And they said, "We don't know." And I think the whole system needs to be reviewed.
What did you learn about his behaviour in prison?
Well, it's become apparent that he has been doing courses for pretty well much the entire time he's been there. And I'm saying this broadly and generally. They talk about males becoming mature, their frontal lobe becomes full maturity when you turn 25. I just don't believe that at all. I think males don't really mature till we're 50, 60. I really don't. And when you include alcohol into the equation, some people, like to tell jokes, some people want to fall asleep, some people become violent. It's not unusual for people to drink and become violent. And I think there's no question of a doubt that when he touches alcohol, the violence, the aggravation comes out, the violence comes out, and it's uncontrollable. And I'm not just talking about Loveridge, I'm talking about thousands of people. And I think, the key to his success in re-entering the community is to understand that he is like that when he touches alcohol. And therefore, will have psychiatric care, he'll have GPs looking after him. They need to find a program that is going to work, because it's very clear that he is still drinking and he's still very violent. And so that's of a concern.
Let's talk about his violent incidents in prison, because we learnt during his parole process last year, when the parole was refused to him, that he had assaulted people in prison, including punching a man in the face. In spite of that, you didn't oppose his parole. Why was that?
So these offences, the very violent offences where he was back in court twice for two separate incidences, and the first one was ongoing, it was multiple reasons, is that we had been informed by Victims Register that he was conforming, that he regretted what he'd done to Thomas and was sorry. It's the usual kind of things. And I'm not just saying that. We know that he's not sorry for killing Thomas. We got an apology note the day before the Supreme Court, and it wasn't written by him. It was written by someone in the legal profession, and there was a squiggle at the bottom, which gave him 25% off right there, just for putting his autograph on a letter. But the violence has been throughout the 12 years. It's hard to believe that the State Parole Authority think that he won't be a risk to the community, or a low risk, they say. But given that he had an outburst on the 27th of February, just 4 or 5 weeks ago, it shows that he is still the same person that he was 12 years ago.
And not just an outburst, he was drunk in prison and was aggravated. And, number one, I don't think the general community understand that prisoners have access to making alcohol and various things that aren't allowed in prison, but they do. And that was new to me, but apparently they do. And he was violent at that time. So we're talking, a month and a half ago, and we weren't aware of that when we put the submission forward saying that we supported the parole. Had we known that, we definitely would not have supported it.
I just want to ask you, before we go to that parole hearing, Kathy, have you ever believed his expressions of remorse for killing your son?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's never been, of course he hasn't been able to contact us. I understand that, but there are ways to reach out to the family and show that you are sorry. There has never been an apology for what he did. So, no, I don't. I don't believe there's ever been any remorse whatsoever.
So let's come to the parole hearing, the recent one. And you had made a submission that said you did not, as you just said, that you did not oppose him being granted bail. Is that because you had faith that it was better for the system to manage a staged release for him rather than release him cold at the very end of his sentence?
Yeah, so we said that we didn't agree with the decision, but that we wouldn't oppose it. And it is important that he, because he's not classified as a minimum risk, he was unable to do day leave or weekend leave, which is obviously getting them back into the community, day by day, and seeing how they're performing, how they're going out there. And because he's not considered minimum security, he was unable to do those day leave things. And so that in itself is a problem with the system, because they should have pre-planned. He's got this much more time in jail, which is another 2 years that we're looking at. And they should have started to work, okay, when does he need to reach minimum security so that we can give him day release? It wasn't done. So they're faced with a situation whereby either they put him on parole, or they keep him in jail till the end of the sentence and release him, which would be terrible. So we support that he needs to have parole, we still do. But what really concerns us, along with other people in our community who drink, is when they become violent. There is no room for violence in our community. And I think in this latest outburst on the 27th of February, he said he became aggressive because of his upcoming parole hearing and the publicity that he would get. Well, firstly, he didn't have to drink. No one forced him to drink the alcohol. And secondly, he should be able to, given the amount of courses that he's undertaken, be able to curb that aggression.
Do you have faith in the courses that he's undertaken?
No. Well, I don't know what the material is in the courses because, again, they don't tell us. They seem to have faith in the system. He did do 40 hours of voluntary work with other inmates to help them through the course. But as I said to Kathy at the time when we found out at the parole hearing, 40 hours, that's when you've been in jail for 12 years, that's not a lot of time to put in to volunteer to help other inmates. And when he was doing the original courses, 5 years ago, he was offending when he was doing those courses. So he was literally very violent, and people were ending up in hospital because of his violence. So the courses are one thing, but it's obviously not helping or supporting his anxiety and his need to express that through violence. It's not working.
Let's go back to the very recent parole hearing. You went into that thinking that parole was better than a cold release at the very end of his sentence. Then you heard that extra information that he'd been violent again. Can you describe that moment?
So we had not been advised of this, but again, there's nothing unusual. They don't advise the victims' families, which again should be reviewed, I believe, because you don't want to go in to a situation like this and suddenly be blindsided by something that they've kept from you. What the judge said to us was that on the 27th of February, he was intoxicated and became violent to the correction services officers. But violent from him and aggression from him is, not a good thing. So I think I looked at Kathy, during the public hearing, and I'm just going,
Can't believe
what's going on? What's happening? It blindsided both of us. We were both totally bemused by what we just heard, and the very fact that they hadn't advised us prior to that meeting, that we had to be in a public hearing with media. His family were probably there. We don't know. Plus a multitude of other people were in the court, and it was the first time we'd heard it. I actually couldn't say anything, and I don't know if I could have interrupted the procedures anyway, because out of the hour hearing, it was in the last 5 minutes that it was told to us. So they left us no room, basically.
Kathy, what was your response to hearing that description of a very recent violent behaviour from him?
I think just absolute disbelief that here we were doing the right thing as far as we were concerned, supporting the parole, albeit that we did say that we wanted him to have the first few months as day release because there still is just over 2 years of his sentence. But then to be told that, as the judge was basically summing everything up, was just... It was disgusting, really. It was just appalling that we've been kept in the dark about that, because we really went in with our submission and supported the parole on a pack of lies.
Kathy, what are you going to do now that you have gone in, you've supported the system, and the system has, in your words, told you a pack of lies?
I don't really think there is anything we can do. And I think whilst, we really didn't want this day to come, it was one of the reasons we decided we always said we didn't want to be there when he was released. That doesn't mean we won't be back in Australia at some point, but we just wanted it to be over. I mean, the loss of the boys will never be over, and it's not something you move on from, it's not something you get over, it's just something you learn to live with, and you try to make the most of what life we have left, and we try to be a little bit happy and find some joy, particularly so that we can not only do that for our daughter, but also for each other. So I just really wanted it to be over. And there was one point where we talked about flying home for the public hearing, and I just turned to Ralph and I said, look, surely with technology today, we can be in that room with a video link without throwing any more money at this or feeling that the only reason we were there and we didn't have to be there was because we always said that we would be at every single hearing to be there to be a voice for Thomas because he was no longer able to speak for himself.
And Kathy, when you hear a description of Loveridge being violent, Does that bring back the memories of the night that Thomas was killed?
Yes, but I think the harder part during the hearing was going through the entire process again. The judge went through every step from that night and right through to when Thomas's life support was turned off and the offender being apprehended. So that was a very difficult experience, and I don't think I was ready for that. And I'm sure Ralph was doing the same, but we're sitting here as close as we are today, watching the hearing and trying to be a part of it. But it was like being in the chapel at the school when we buried both the boys. You just can't control yourself. Your legs start to shake and your whole body is just trembling because you're listening to this whole process again. So yes, to hear Loveridge is still being violent to this very day. What has he learnt? It's basically just been a bunch of boxes that's been ticked, and whilst the authorities are trying to rehabilitate him, I don't believe that they do rehabilitate them, and I don't believe that they really support them when they get out. I don't know enough about it, but my understanding is they don't provide them with jobs. How do they go out to the community and not reoffend if they haven't got the support to be actually even given some work when they get out there? So he's basically, almost just assuming he's going to go back out into society. He's going to have all these rules applied to him, but it's only a matter of time. He can't be watched 24 hours a day, and he will be drinking and he will become violent and he will reoffend. And even if that happens and he goes back into prison, it's only going to be till the end of the sentence. So they may as well not have released him on parole in the first place if they don't have anything in place to look after them.
Ralph, I can see the same thing for you, that your breathing just got shallower when Kathy was describing those circumstances. What is the experience for you of hearing his violence being described?
Well, it was shock initially, as I mentioned before, but I think, I said to Kathy the other day, I said, what's the good that we can get out of this? And firstly is that I believe the communication with the victims' families is not good. It's not nearly where it should be, and I think they should review, even in the final document from the parole the other night. For us, it was night. The other night, it had the wrong dates when Thomas was killed. It had the 14th of June 2014. So things, and there was lots of repetition, all those kind of things. It looked like it had been thrown together by somebody who was, really didn't have a lot of interest, because you wouldn't have got those things wrong, and nobody obviously, proofread it. So I think the positive is that hopefully the State Parole Board authorities sit down and start looking at how they can do this a lot better. Because I think, as parents of a child who was murdered, manslaughter, we should know all the internet. We should know everything. And I think, secondly, we want him to get out, and we want him to be a model person in the community. We don't want him to reoffend. And we hope that he doesn't reoffend. But the signals are so strong that, the people who are taking care of him while he's on parole need to do a really good job, or they'll fail. And it appears to be all around alcohol and aggression. If something happens that he doesn't like, he becomes aggressive, and then the alcohol adds the violence. So we want the best for him. Not that we like him, but it has to happen. So we have to accept it. And the only way to accept it is to, ensure that he's got the support around him, and that he does, get on with his life, and he's learnt something. But that's just not apparent at the moment.
Is there anything you can do, or is the die cast now? He will be released shortly.
I think, Judge Bellew has granted parole. I think that would be quite difficult to overturn once it's been, unless it was appealed by the DPP or the State Premier. I don't know their powers in that area. I've never heard them getting involved in parole hearings before. So to answer your question, I don't know if there's anything else we can do. I tend to think he's considered low risk. What is low risk? How does the State Parole Authority view, what's their definition of low risk? Because to me, it was a week before. That's the low risk, the violence.
Kathy, you once said, you used an incredible phrase that I heard. You said you hoped there might be a possibility one day that the two of you can rest in your own thoughts. Will that day come?
I'd like to think so. I think it's, whilst we're not like this every day, and we do find laughter, it's been a very long and arduous journey. And I think we have a lot of healing to do to even understand each other. But we're trying. We're still together. Or sometimes I wonder how, but nobody knows me better than Ralph, and I also don't believe that that anybody knows him better than me. But we just keep trying.
Kathy, Ralph, and remembering your two beautiful sons, Thomas and Stuart, with all our very best wishes for the days ahead. Thank you for spending some time with us this evening.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.